Crowds pushed and jostled in the market square of a large city. A crier stood at the base of a nearby pyramid. "People of Amulon," he cried, "your army returns in victory!" The crowd cheered. They rushed out of the square. Only the sellers remained, putting away their wares as quickly as they could. There would be no more profit today. The very air reeked of excitement. The city guards announced the arrival of the army with conch shells and drums. The crowds gathered, dressed in their best and brightest clothes. They greeted the army with cheers. They played music, they sang, they danced in the streets. Nochehautl passed the cheering crowds. Some of the warriors smiled and waved at the crowds, but not he. His gaze caught the familiar face of a young girl dressed in a blue dress with a yellow sunburst made to match his necklace. She smiled at him. He nodded. Then she was lost in the crowd. The guards marched the half-naked and starving prisoners up the Avenue of the Dead to the Pyramid of the Sun. The residents threw garbage on them as they passed. When one of them tried to blend into the crowd, he was pushed back into the line. A group of priests, dressed in white, stood at the top of the pyramid between the altar and the temple. Olin and the other warriors stood on the right side of the priests. The guards and prisoners stood on the left. Nochehautl took the place of honor at the head of the warriors. One of the priests held up his hand. The music stopped and the crowd grew silent. "Make way for Tepiltzen," he yelled. Olin grinned at Nochehautl, but Nochehauttl's grim face remained expressionless. The old hardened high priest came out of the temple. He was naked except for a white loincloth. He cried, "Tonight we celebrate a great victory for Nochehautl." He turned towards the stone idol with a bowl carved into its motionless hands. Tepiltzen turned to the statue and announced, "Your sacrifices give life to all creation. Now we give sacrifices back to you." Tepiltzen walked over to the altar. "Bring the first sacrifice," he commanded. A familiar face caught Nochehauttl's attention. His head snapped up and his eyes flew wide open. His stomach twisted into a knot. The stench of blood so common to battle now sickened him. It was the young woman Nochehautl had tried to save. The skinny farmer stood in front of the young woman. "No, no," he cried. Two priests pulled him away and threw him to the side. Before they could grab the woman, she walked over to the altar. She stood motionless before Tepiltzen. She stared at him. Her face was as hard as the flint knife he held. She held him spellbound with her gaze. Tepiltzen's face showed surprise. Never before had he seen such courage. He hesitated. The crowd sensed a snag in the ceremony and grew quiet. Tepiltzen's face hardened. He motioned to the priests. They grabbed the woman and laid her on the altar. Tepiltzen's practice cut was as skillful as the surgeons who could perform brain surgery with their delicate jade instruments. They healed life. The high priest took it. Some of the crowd cut themselves and sprinkled the blood at the base of the pyramid. The mightiest warrior of the land could take no more. He turned his head away. The last sound Nochehautl heard was a skinny farmer's sobs of "Yuretsi, Yuretsi." Nochehauttl's reaction was not lost on the high priest. He held his arms up again and waited for the crowd to grow silent. "Let us honor Huitzilopochtli." He raised a hand before a carved idol with armor and weapons. "Let us honor the greatest warriors in the land. Let us honor Olin, Eztli, and Nochehautl." At the last name, Tepiltzen flung drops of blood onto the warrior. Nochehautl lowered his head in shame. The high priest smiled. Surely the leader of his army wouldn't mind a tiny spattering of blood, would he? Nochehautl washed his hands. He threw away his blood-stained bracers. Then he noticed his blue and yellow necklace. There was one dark spot near the center. He rubbed it with a damp cloth, but it would not come clean. His daughter would be disappointed. "Father!" cried the young girl in the blue and yellow dress. She flung her arms around Nochehautl neck. He inhaled deeply, remembering the familiar smells of home. Since his wife died, his daughter and 2 sons were all he had left. He looked at the sleeping young boy and babe in a crib woven of reeds. He remembered the day his wife handed him a tiny bundle of blankets and softly announced, "You have a son." He had taken many lives in battle, but giving life would always be a miracle to him. "We will call him Pili," she said. "Will Pili be a great warrior like you?" said the girl with innocent eyes, bringing him back to the present. He held her close. "I am not a great warrior." "My necklace," she said, holding the end in front of her. "It's dirty." She sounded disappointed. "I love you," said Nochehautl in a whisper. Yuretsi. 2000, A Stripling Warrior's Story. Now available on Amazon.com.